Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations. Good morning, welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing in Hosea. So I mentioned at the outset, I've been having a problem with the studies cutting off at the end, and then I immediately have to go and upload the study just so that the last few minutes are available. I'm going to try to end before, because it seems to be happening around 55 minutes. I'm going to try to end the study after about 55 minutes, or soon before, just to see if that helps at all. But also today I have a thunderstorm in the area, which may very well interrupt the stream. And so if that gets frustrating, you may want to come back later and watch it. But maybe it won't. You know, sometimes these things are hard to predict. Anyways, so okay, we talked last about the Lord taking away the corn and the time thereof, the wine and the season thereof. At least that was what I was talking about when the study was cut off. If you missed that, you might want to go back and listen to the last 5 minutes of the study. And then, in verse 10 he says, and now, what did I do? Let me see here real quick. Yeah, verse 10, that's where we're starting. That's right. And now will I discover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and none shall deliver her out of my hand. You know, what he says is, I gave Israel all these blessings, which they turned around and gave to their gods, to other things. They used what I gave them in a way that, you know, and like I said, he's comparing it to an adulterous affair. When he says, in fact, that I don't even know if I really looked up. I didn't never do it, did I? Let's see. Well, it says whoredoms. It means adultery. It means, like, because it'll say playing the harlot. It's not so much the idea of actual. A lot of times people think it means actual prostitution. But it means, you know, like as God said of Israel, she was unlike other whores. Because whores usually receive gifts from their lovers. You know, prostitutes are paid by the ones who use them, right? He said Israel was different in that she paid her lovers. She gave gifts to her lovers. And that is, you know, and that's the idea, is that what a woman could be paid to receive or to give of herself. She could be paid for that. But instead, she's so debased and debauched that she pays to be abused. And that's the idea, is that, you know, it's such a strange thing. And he's comparing, you know, you took the things I gave you to bless you, and you gave them the idols, as if like an adulterous affair. I compared it to examples I had experienced of friends who had such circumstances. You know, it's like their home that they paid for and built for their family being used by their wife to house her lover Oh, but how many times has that happened? And not that it never happens the other way around either, but this is not what that's about, you know? Big bug. I wonder, I'm going to look up lewdness in Greek. Not Greek, Hebrew, Paul, we're in the Old Testament, that's right. Lewdness. Not bluth. Immodesty, shamelessness. Yeah. Discover here means like uncover or reveal. That's the idea of discover, that we think of discover as like, oh, I discovered something. Like I found out about it. But it means to find it out, meaning to expose it publicly. So we would use uncover, I think, in these days to use this for this verb. I will uncover her shame. I will expose her shameless behavior. And the lovers, and sometimes the lovers are other gods. But I guess my thought is, okay, how the gods have no eyes. They have no ears to hear, no eyes to see. They touch not, they taste not, they handle not. They have no sensory reality. But I suppose it means like the analogy would be, of course, to have it, come out publicly in the sight of her lovers, I suppose means in the sight of the public. And so, if the lovers are idols under every green tree, it's the idea of the whole nation being exposed, uncovered by the invasion of the Assyrians, in which they will be stripped naked on the same hills where they worship. They will be marched. The same places where they were unfaithful to the Lord, they will be exposed. Their unfaithfulness will be exposed, and they will be literally exposed. And the next verse, I will also cause all her mirth to cease, her feast days, her new moons and her sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. And I will destroy her vines and her fig trees, whereof she hath said, these are my rewards that my lovers have given me, and I will make them a forest, or given me. That's the end of her quote. And I will make them a forest, and the beasts of the field shall eat them, the beasts of the field. This is a theme that comes out prophetically a lot, is because, and it gets carried down, you might recognize it from Revelation, right? Chapter 18. When it talks about the doom of Babylon, it says, the voice of the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be no more heard at all in thee. The voice of harpers and musicians, the voice of rejoicing. I'm not going to get specific. I think rejoicing is not specifically one of the things. But the idea of the bridegroom, the bride, the harpers, the musicians, all the celebrations, and also all the merchandise, right? She was filled with merchandise, filled with mirth and celebration, all in the midst of this, right? And and that is what a lot worshiping of other gods is. Like the Lord gives us feast days and things to celebrate, right? But they would turn it into debauchery. They would turn it into, and of course, then they would say the produce they had, the increase they have. They would look to their idolatry and say, this is what we have to thank for it. We've worshipped other gods, and they've given us increase. When a lot of the increase they had was based on the blessing God had given from before. God promised to bless Israel. And not only that, God makes it to rain on the just and the unjust, on all the thankless hordes of humanity. There is blessing. And then, we lose it, and we say, God is terrible. Where's God? I would say it's funny. Like people receive all kinds of good things from God, thanklessly, and then when something bad happens, they blame God also, which is not entirely. I mean, God is certainly able to avert things, right? He can avert our suffering, but the idea that it is necessary or we merit it is completely out of bounds. God does not owe us a happy life. He does not even owe us life. The fact that we have a life is already a blessing. And so when the blessings we have are in danger of being taken away, or they literally are being taken away, then we become resentful. There's a lot of resentment in the world against God. You see it in it's in the storytelling, it's in the movies, it's in the culture, it's in the jokes. I mean, a lot of this has actually died down a bit because, to a great degree, Christians have lost the culture war. As far as like, and if it was a war to be won, we fought it wrong. It's been my opinion since the 90s, back when this was going on, or beginning. They were talking about it. I mean, it goes back even farther than that. And there's all, it's not, the thing is, it's a never ending, there's no like culture war that comes to an end and then there's peace. It's like a never ending struggle. But the way you win it is not by co-opting the state into a tyranny that causes everyone to resent Christianity or resent the way of the Lord. The love of God must come from each person. Israel had all the rules. They had the law of Moses and the priesthood, but people were unwilling to enforce that because nobody really believed in it. Or, when I say nobody, I mean most people just had no regard for the Lord. All the good that God gave them in the time of plenty is being taken away. And I will visit upon her the days of Baalim, wherein she burned incense to them, and she decked herself with her earrings and her jewels, and went after her lovers, and forgat me, saith the Lord. That's the imagery. Baal was another god. You remember Elijah and the prophets of Baal? That's from 1 Kings, right? And that comes into, Elijah was, a generation before this or so. Well, no, this is Jehu's great-grandson, actually. So, well, it's, a few generations back. But, I mean, it's like within living memory. Because, I mean, sons of Jehu reigned, something like that. Yeah, well, whatever. It's within 100 years of Elijah, let's say that. All right? Around about a century. That's the scale we're talking about since Elijah. Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Jezebel was a worshiper of Baal, which was another god. Baal, I've never been sure to call it Baal or Baal, but Baalim or Baalim is, I am at the end of a word in Hebrew, is plural. It means that it's plural. So but it's sometimes just like the name of God, not the name of God, but the word God. Elohim, or Elohim in Hebrew, is a plural. Like throughout the book of Genesis, when it says God, it's Elohim. Very often, all over the Bible, it says Elohim, Elohim, Elohim. And it's given in the plural for God. And there's all kinds of analysis linguistically why Some people call it the plural of majesty. Like the king will use the plural of majesty. We are not pleased, that kind of thing. And there's certainly Trinitarian arguments you can make for that, But there is one God, right? And there is one, and there's one Lord. And Baal means essentially Lord, Master. But it was not the name by which, Jehovah was known. It was another sort of Baal, Lord, God. And in fact, a lot. If you think of it, a lot of the names, like Moloch was another god they worshipped, and Moloch is similar to the word Melech, which means king. And all the names of the gods they worshipped, like Chemosh, that was the god of the Ammonites, I believe, subduer. The subduer, and so on and so forth. They had names of their gods, which were grandiose. I mean, of course, because I assume that the Greeks thought Zeus was Lord of Heaven, the thunder god, and so also Baal was a lord. They had lords many. And gods many, but there's God, like Paul says, there are lords many and gods many, but we know that there's really but one God. But there are many that be called gods. And he's saying, I will visit on you the days of Baalim. What that means is I'm going to remember those days where you were going after Baal. She burned incense. They burn incense to the gods. To what? Incense is likened to prayer. And so it is an attempt to communicate with the gods, right? Burning incense. And so people, so they would burn incense, to get the God's attention. Do you smell this? I'm trying to talk to you. I'm trying to get Baal's attention. I want Baal to hear my prayer. And then, he kind of seamlessly moves between the analogy of just literally talking about their practices of worshiping false gods, and then going into the analogy of the adulteress. She decks herself with earrings and jewels and went after her lovers and forgot me, saith the Lord. Their mind was completely turned after the things that were lords of their life. Like I said, there are no actual other gods, but in many regards, this is where people get the arguments that atheists believe in God. People will say that. I understand they don't believe in God, but they have in their minds things that serve as God. Meaning that they have places in their mind that are occupied by things that take the place of God, that God would otherwise be enthroned. And if they don't have something there, it may be something as simple as like some arbitrary moral standard, because ultimately morals are arbitrary. We may have justifications for them, but at some level they're arbitrary. And arbitrary, what do I mean by that? I mean, there's no reason. Like, it's not, they'll try to say everything's based on reason, pure reason. But it isn't. At some level, it's just a feeling. It's just a decision. That's wrong. There was I forgot his name off the top of my head. There was a guy who did studies on morality, human morality. One of the things they tested was like, why is incest immoral? And then they went down, they took out all the, people would say, well, there could be deformed babies or blah, blah, blah. They took out all the rational reasons. And it came down to people were just like, well, I just think it's wrong. Right? Because we know things are wrong, not based on some rational cascade of logical decisions and points, but because they're just wrong. And those ideas those irrational ideas they're not derived from just observation and such. They are at their base something that is really just, I don't want to say, well, they occupy a place in your mind that also God occupies. He occupies the same space, because God is not something we know through experiment. I know God through experience, but it's not the kind of experience that people would consider rational. They would, they would not consider that logical. I know, because I've been told so, I've been told so, right? Even though I've argued strenuously, it's reasonable. Like, because God gave me His Spirit and poured out His power on me, I felt that, and I was calling on the name of Jesus. So I say it is reasonable. I mean, it may not be a pure, based on pure reason, but there's definitely good, reasonable reasons to continue under the assumption that it's true. And so they put gods in their minds that rule their lives. If they don't, then they're just the most unruly kind of people. What people who have no beliefs at all about right and wrong, who don't adopt, because I don't think it's impossible to have morality without God. Morality without God is idolatry, ultimately. It's similar to it, meaning you're not acknowledging God, but you're still keeping up the facade that religious piety would create. It means a religious piety, attention to religious concerns ought to generate in men a certain level of righteous reverence, respect. It ought to govern our interactions with each other. And everyone has some sort of governor like that. If they're not bowing, and I've talked about this in the idea of worship. Worship is the idea of to bow, to assent to the authority of another. If you don't assent to the authority, I may not be able to explain it, but I don't know the rational reason, because a lot of times they'll say is, I can't explain rationally why the moral thing, but I do believe there is a rational explanation for all the morality. Fine, whatever. But having the morality, rational or not, you're bowing to something. You're giving over your will to something that isn't you. Those who only serve their own will, who only serve their own desires, are the truly godless. And they're some of the most frightening people. That's where you get your sociopaths. People who are stuffing bodies into, concrete pipes or whatever. I don't know. They're just bad people. People who are willing to do anything. But people who are worshiping other gods, they're looking to their gods. Oh, help me, God. Help me, Baal. Give me increase. Help me do this, do that. And Baal, sometimes the other gods are more attractive, because they don't have all. Because here's the thing, you can have morality without God. It's just not going to be the same morality. There's going to be certain things left out. In our worship today, one of the things that people live out, we have an extremely lax sense of sexual morality. At least among a lot of just rank and file believers. It's just fornication, even parents, would often prefer their children to live with their intended, spouse. Like, let's say there was a young couple and they were going to get married after only knowing each other a brief time. There are some parents who would say, maybe we should live together a while longer, just to make sure it's a good idea. And it seems wise. One should not necessarily hastily go into marriage, but neither should one just, let's just live together in sin. But see, in our worldview today, in the modern world, that is not even really a sin anymore, is it? It's like, well, this is just my girlfriend. And it's like, sure, we're involved in an intimate marriage-like relationship in which we have some sort of vague commitment to each other. I always thought that was funny. Like, you're in this you're not allowed to cheat, but you're not married. You can get out anytime you want. Like, you can cheat. You just have to. The cool thing to do is to announce it ahead of time. To break up and then go off and cheat. Well, there's no cheating at that point. It's just like, because it never was anything to begin with. It was just imaginary. There was no real commitment. I mean, there is some sort of commitment, but there's no, like, firm commitment. It's the weirdest thing if you think about it. Like, the odd, they belong to each other, yet they don't. Yeah, I mean, it's like having one foot. It's like one foot in the pool, one foot on the shore. So it's not willing to, or on the deck. Pool, deck would be better than shore and pool. Right? One foot in the water, one foot on the land. Not willing to go wholly into it. But with their other gods, they get dressed up. They make themselves beautiful for their gods. What does that mean? And what does that represent? Make yourself beautiful for other gods. I want to do the things that please this other moral standard. They've been saying that there's a sort of a new religion rising. It's a sort of on it's more of a political religion. It's one in the biggest form of, and you notice it because whenever you're not allowed to say publicly is essentially blasphemy. I discovered this when I said I was candid about my feelings about something once to people, and I realized they looked at me as though I had spoken blasphemy. And I realized though they were Christians, were being absorbed into this new religion. Because this new religion, you want to be beautiful for the new gods. So you don't want to say anything that might offend them. And, and I don't try to offend other people's gods unnecessarily. So I'm not going to do it here. Because one, they consider it blasphemy. I consider it, well, I don't do that anyways, because the new religion is a sort of anti-racism, and it's like, I'm not a racist, so I don't, but the idea that, like, the way people live in fear of saying things that might get them labeled, so it's like, that's kind of weird. Just the utter terror, the tyranny of the accusation. Like, there used to be the thing that's called the Scarlet Letter, right? When a woman was, I don't know why, I forgot, I think I read the book or the short story, whichever it was, when I was in junior high or something, and I didn't pay very close attention to that. But I know the Scarlet Letter was some sort of mark of ill repute on a woman, either fornication or something. Like, she'd done something she shouldn't do, right? And I might have been among the Puritans or something. It sounds like something the Puritans would do, marked out as immoral, and in such a way that made them really anathema from society. I mean, like, they were like a cursed thing. Like, don't touch them. They're, and the way that these days, when people offend certain sensibilities, they don't just say that person's bad. They go after their employment. They go after their ability to make transactions. And it's very, I'm looking down my thing. It says kilobytes per second. 0. That's not good. We've lost like a whole minute. Okay, well, whatever. But they live in fear. Or they want you to live in fear, actually, because they want you to respect their God. They want you to impress their God. That's why people go out of their way to signal their virtue about certain things. That's why, I don't even like saying I'm not a racist, because I feel like I don't need to say that. That's ridiculous. I thought racists, for the most part, went extinct a while ago, as far as I'm concerned. It's just really not a thing. As far as, I don't know. Yeah, does it exist? I don't. Not really. No, actually, I don't think so. Well, sort of, but not the way people talk about it. No, what they're talking about is a boogeyman. Anyways, I don't like to have to deny it. It's like, do you deny it? It's like, it makes me feel like I'm trying to put on gold earrings for Baal. You know, I'm not trying to impress you or your gods. Because that's their standard of righteousness. So, whatever Baal wants, she's going to make herself pretty for Baal. You know what I mean? Baal doesn't care about your fornication. Baal doesn't care about this, that, but Baal's got some things he cares about. He likes you to look pretty. He likes you to put on earrings. He likes you to put on jewels. Make sure you paint your eyes just the right shade of purple or whatever. You know, do all the things that Baal likes. And that's a metaphor. You know, it's not, I don't mean literally that wearing jewelry has anything to do with that, much less makeup. But it surely has a lot to do with adultery, does it not? You know, they make themselves up, they dress themselves up for their affairs. And men do the same thing, you know, for their affairs they get all done up and look nice or whatever. Or maybe they just bring out their money and show how wealthy they are. For men it's a different thing. So she went after her lovers and forgot me, saith the Lord. Okay, verse 14. Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak comfortably to her. So that was going to say, all this, I'm going to expose her nakedness. I'm going to uncover her shame. And then he's saying, I'm going to allure her. I mean, that sounds like seduction. That's the word I want to use. I love when I go look at the definition of a word, patha, defined by Dr. Strong as allure. Well, I know what allure means because I don't have to think too hard about it. It's got the word lure in it, right? Entice. Interesting. The word comes from the idea of being open. It means to be spacious, wide, or open. And I guess to me that seems as the idea of vulnerable. Like if you try to lure a fish, you're saying, look here, right in the open, we have a worm just for you. You know, bringing something out into a clear, open space to be seen, to allure. But it means to allure, okay? Which means to entice, to draw with some sort of, like to show an opening so as to bring in, to lure in. Jump back on me again. So, and bring her into the wilderness and speak comfortably to her. Am I just out of my mind? Oh, I didn't mention, I'll destroy her vines, right? She said, these are my rewards with my lover. I will make them a forest. And that is another thing prophetically that comes up a lot where when he says, I will make them a forest, I mean, I will return them to nature. I will return them to their wild and chaotic state. That's what that means. I just wanted to... When he says, I will make them a forest is an unplanned ecosystem, right? Whereas a garden is very specific. A vineyard is a very well tended. You have to look after your vineyard. You have to prune it and all that stuff. So I will allure her, bring her into the wilderness, and speak comfortably to her. This has to do with the fact that after they were taken into captivity, that's when the Lord began to speak again to his people, to draw them back to him. Because sometimes, it just simply goes to this, that people need to sort of hit rock bottom. Oftentimes before they will turn to the Lord. It's just the nature of human beings. That sometimes, as long as things go well, we tend not to examine what we're doing, because why bother, right? It's very rare that people question what they're doing and say, because if everything's going right, you say like, well, I must be doing things right because everything's going all right. It's not until things go wrong that you start to say like, well, what's going on? How'd this happen? What were the things that led me down this way? And it was through this examination of things that the Hebrews realized where they'd gone astray with the Lord. And it was after the captivities, especially after the Babylonian captivity of Judah, that the Jews truly began. That's how how the scribes and Pharisees, or the Pharisee sect, as far as I know, arose. They were basically people who were going around teaching the law to the people who would be educated and know the law, and they were kind of like lay teachers of the law, because you had the priesthood, and the priesthood was almost fully concerned with performing priestly duties. There was not like the whole, like there was the temple. In the Old Testament, there was no synagogue, like the local place where you learned your Torah. Because it was sort of like supposed to be, these are my commandments. Teach them your children and your children's children. Teach them to your children. And the people were to hear it and then to teach it and to keep it by truth. But it's very difficult to maintain that. Because, word of mouth you can effectively transfer ideas by word of mouth and by oral tradition. That's, like I said, I can recite the Pledge of Allegiance. No one ever wrote it down for me, ever. I learned it completely orally, and I can recite it word for word. And there are many things like that people can certainly learn things orally. It's like we're not like, we have linguistic capabilities that can memorize things, and certainly ideas and morals, and we can pass them down. But it's an unstructured thing, though. Unless you put also a structure around it, around that oral tradition. If you put a structure around it, like a societal structure that helps maintain it, it's going to have a tendency for people to, it requires individual attention. And that's what Christ has called us to, that sort of individual attention. But we have the bonus of having the written word and having the Spirit of God in us to lead us and guide us and bring it to our remembrance and help us remember our God and help us keep ourselves oriented towards Him. And that's what this is about. It's like, I'm going to cause all these evils to come upon her, meaning Israel. But then when I bring her into the wilderness, into the captivity, I'm going to speak to her differently. They must suffer these things, but I'm also going to speak comfortably to them that, yes, if you return to your God, He will forgive it. It's not like it's not like He's going to reverse the sufferings you've endured for your sins. But that's the point, is that they should suffer. We often endure chastisement for the Lord, because we're not doing the right things. And Paul says we should rejoice in that because it means we are His sons and not bastards. I don't care what that kid does, His discipline is no concern of mine because he's not really my son and I'm not too happy with him, They can get, I care about my children's behavior, right? But there are times like I coach and stuff, and when I feel like kids are not cooperative or they're too difficult. There's a point at which I sort of write them off a little bit. As far as like, if they're going to be silly and goofy, it's like I don't invest as much time helping them. Because it's like there are other kids. I can only go so, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like we have a coach for every child, in our program. We don't. So, what do? This kid's giggling and rolling around and not being serious and not really wanting to learn. And this one over here really wants to learn and he's patiently waiting for me. Who am I going to... The kid who's giggling and rolling around needs attention and discipline. But you know what? He's not my son. And that's the hard truth of it. You're not my son. And, and certainly, if I'm going to pay attention to someone, it's going to be someone who's listening. First, it's going to be the one I'm going to... Like, if my son was doing that, I'd really take a lot of it. I'd give it a lot of attention. I'd want to correct their behavior. I never have that problem. And I will give her vineyards from thence in the valley of Achor. Achor means trouble. I will give her the valley of trouble. I just remember that. For a door of hope. Because that's the idea. Through the trouble you go through, it opens the way to hope again. This is a theme of my life. I've gone through a lot of troubles where in the midst of the trouble, I've had things where I was like really feeling like my back was against the wall. And people around me were feeling it too, and some began to despair. And then I would say, this is when it gets darkest. This is when the Lord will show his mighty arm. And he will show his might and his power. And then he does. And I see how the Lord works things, and I trust him more. And trouble often is the doorway to hope. Because like I said, when when things are going all right, you don't even question, you don't even look for hope. Your only expectation is that things are going to continue as they have. Things will continue. We won't change anything. But then things start going wrong. You start looking at yourself, what am I doing wrong? And then you turn to the Lord and say, how can I fix this? And, is the Lord uses this most heartbreaking of analogies, this most heartbreaking of analogies, a man who's married to a wife who's, not just committed adultery, but is a serial adulteress. That's the idea. He's trying his best to be a good husband, to give her everything she needs, and all she does is throw it back in his face and spend it on her lovers and all that. And render, all that. And there is a consequence for that. Notice, there's consequence. And I'm telling you, in Christianity, do not think there is sin without consequence. If God loves you, there will be consequences for sins. If we just keep getting away with it, that's not necessarily a good thing. If everything's going great, like if my life just keeps going great, but I'm a fornicator, and everything just keeps going great, and there's no bumps in the road, everything's just great, I'm just living in sin, living in unrighteousness, not even mindful of it really, and everything's great, that's not necessarily a good sign. Though you won't think so. You'll think, no, it's fine. Baal is pleased. The Lord is pleased. He must find me really attractive. I must appear to him as a gold-decked beauty with jewels about her breasts, and ribbons in her hair. I'm so pretty to my Lord because he blesses me so. It's not our true Lord. That's the thing is that I used to wrestle with this idea when I was young about like I wanted that if someone didn't have Christianity right, that it was like their worship of Jesus was idolatry. I had this sense because there were false Christs and false prophets, right? And there are false Christs shall rise. In the end times, the mystery Babylon, what's so insidious about it is she thinks she has Christ. So there is that. But I've come to the point where I believe that until that actually becomes a reality, until there is a false Christ literally standing before us all, and people are worshiping him, I'm not going to regard other believers as idolaters or not Christians. I'm just not going to do that because Jesus called all 7 churches of Revelation churches and dealt with them as if they were his. Though he talked about idolatry in the midst of them. And though I will not call it idolatry, it is in the when we have a misunderstanding of who Christ is. Essentially what we've got is we've got the name of Christ, but not the person. Like let's make up a real easy example. Let's say I think, well, Jesus, he dined with sinners, and so he loves sin, and specifically prostitutes. So I'm going to see lots of prostitutes like Jesus did, and thereby he's going to be pleased with me. I'll buy their services, use their services, and then I'll leave tracts behind so that they could find Jesus. Isn't that just the sort of thing that Jesus would love for a man to do? Because what is, it's love, right? And they need the money, and there's a lot of synergistic goodness and good vibes being passed around in this little thing. All right, I'm trying to show you how people justify in their minds. Okay, and I think that's what Jesus wants me to see prostitutes, and I'll preach the gospel, so it'll be good. Well, that's not the sort of thing Jesus would have us do. You know what I mean? Preaching the prostitutes is fine, but it's like, you don't do it through use of their service. There's other ways to help people out. If you really have a heart for that. But it's like, what we're covering up, we're using Jesus to cover up our own sins, but not in the way that his blood was shed, his shed blood was designed to cover our sins. Not in that way. Not that we should make excuse and justifications for things that we know are wrong. But when we make excuses and justifications for things we know are wrong, it's almost like we're forming we have a different image of Christ in mind. And it's not the image of Christ that is the one we know from the Bible, that we know who is Christ in truth, but it's almost as though there is some other character whose name is Jesus, who we call Christ, who has a lot of the same story elements, but is in some fundamental ways different. And though I do not generally regard just fall, because here's the problem, is like we all on some level don't know God. And so our image of Christ on some level of analysis, meaning on the ultimate level of analysis where God is, I may think things about Christ that aren't exactly right. What I was saying the other day, I was talking about how, the things that I found turned me from sin. And I listed off some things like resentment, anger. And these are things people say, well, this is bad. Godly sorrow that works repentance is good and not to be repented of. And I do think it is justifiable to say, I grew resentful of the temptations and sins that led me astray. Like that these feelings do not have no place at all. What's wrong is misplaced resentment, like resenting the success of someone else, or resenting God for your lot in life, which is mostly the result of your own missteps. You know what I mean? If you place it at the proper position, meaning like, I resent these things for ruling over my life, for leading me astray. And those strong feelings, because thou hast loved righteousness and hated iniquity, God has anointed you with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. That's from Hebrews, quoting the Psalms. But the powerful negative emotions do have a place. That's why God says, vengeance is mine. There is a time of vengeance and a time of wrath. And we ought not regard that as knee-jerk negativity. Right? But on some level, I may misapprehend these things. I may think, oh, this negative thing is actually good. When no, God genuinely hates it. Right? But I've got this idea that, oh, it's okay. Or it's not so bad. You know what I mean? Or I've got some doctrine wrong. Let's say I believe in the rapture, but I don't. But let's say, that was one of the things I used to sort of want to say, like, hey, if you believe in the rapture, it's kind of like you have a false God. Like, you believe in Jesus who's going to come down from the sky and rip you out before the tribulation. So that's kind of like a false Jesus, isn't it? Only to see that same kind of thinking turned around on me, and I'm like, really, is that where we're getting, where we don't even consider each other Christians based on our misunderstanding of doctrine? And I think that is going a bit, until it actually proves itself. Our image of Christ might be a little bit nicked up and tarnished and not exactly precise. Well, we have to have the general form. And there's the thing, is that God sometimes winks at our ignorance. That says so in I think it's, it says in times past he has winked at ignorance of the Gentiles, or something like that, or somehow. But it's that God will give us some leeway, because he knows our frame, he understands our ignorance. He doesn't reveal everything to us. It's what we do with what we've been given that is the most important. What we do know. He that is faithful in that which is least will also be faithful in that which is greater. Meaning this, it's like, if I see you, if you're given a little bit of responsibility and you're faithful to it, that gives me confidence to give you more, right? Because I think, well, they were able to handle, but if you can't even handle a little bit of responsibility, who's going to give you more responsibility? What kind of, you know what I mean? It's like, you give someone a job and say, okay, your job is to alphabetize these cards, right? I was going to choose push a broom, but there's reasons I don't choose that. Because one time I took a job as a janitor because I was in desperate need of money. And I didn't last a week because apparently I was incompetent. Things just really didn't go well for me that week. It was very unfair in my mind. Well, certainly I think in reality also. Well, that's another story. But so I'm saying, like say someone obviously, if you can't handle pushing the broom around, they're not going to upgrade you to manager, okay? And so, if I give you some, would you please alphabetize these cards? And you can't do it. I'm not going to say, like, well, here, I've got 10,000 more. Would you please also alphabetize these cards? I'm not going to give you a bigger responsibility when the little one, here, put these 100 cards in alphabetical order. And you can't do it. Why give you more? It doesn't make any sense. I forgot why that was connected. That was all connected, of course. We can assume that safely. All right, we're coming up to the point where I usually... it's funny, my thing shows this nice green light, which I haven't seen all day, which means I'm getting like a nice steady connection. I feel like tempting YouTube. I'm like, I don't like to click on the dashboard to find out where we are, but let's see, one more verse. Probably shouldn't do it. I'm just curious to see, can I get a study out without having the end clipped off? Is that possible anymore? So through the valley of trouble, God opens the door of hope. And she shall sing there in the wilderness, as in the days of her youth, Israel's youth, in the day when she came out of the land of Egypt. Yeah. So we're going to have to pick up with this thought next time. I do not want to continue past 55 minutes because this is where everything gets cut off all the time. Hopefully it works. Maybe tomorrow I'll try to extend it again. I'm also thinking it may be that there's something with my stream since it's scheduled for 7. Maybe they changed some setting. I've got to look into this so that it ends at 8. Like, have I been capped at 1 hour? They're like, no more hour and 5-minute studies for you. I don't know. So we'll find out. Anyways, thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to studying with you again tomorrow. And we'll continue in Hosea.
Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations.